Hey everybody, welcome to the U.S. History Screencast. Today we're going to be talking about so what, now what, which is basically a way for students and people in general to really just sort of systematically think about, a certain idea, or I think it works really well with turning points, but basically gives students a way to break down situations and really think deeply about what is going on and what could be maybe the outcomes of that situation. So, just to give you a little more sort of background, because kind of the key of this is figuring out what does what mean, what does so what mean, and what does now what mean. So, what? When we say what, we basically are just talking about what are the facts and what information can you gather. So, this is the very straightforward. If you watch the other screencasts, kind of the explicit ideas. So you're essentially just gathering information that is as best it can be objective. The so what is more about what does it mean and what conclusions can you draw. So this is kind of the deeper thinking where you talk about, whatever situation or change that you're discussing, what does it actually mean? And this is obviously going to be the harder one. This is where the deeper thinking comes in. And what conclusions or at least guesses can we make about what's going on. The now what is basically, all right, now that we've gone through the facts and trying to figure out what they mean, what in the world is going to happen next? So you try and figure out not necessarily what will happen next, but usually it's just what should or what do you think will happen next. So this is just sort of guessing about the future of, because this has happened, what may be the outcome or what should be done next. And for those of you that are a little more visual, I think this graphic does a great job of illustrating visually what's going on. So you can see the what is almost more like kind of description. The so what has a lot of thinking and analysis and drawing conclusions. And then that pushes you to the now what. Where you can go future goals and actions, or what's kind of cool about this is it can be somewhat cyclical. So it's not necessarily a bad thing if you are doing something and you have to do this a couple times to figure out what the best way to do something is. So one great thing about this is not just for U.S. history. This can be your everyday life, which that's always great when we can use U.S. history as a lens for something that they can use outside the classroom. So, like most of the screencasts, if you've watched more than just this one, I like to use a non-U.S. history related idea first, and this is especially if you have 10th and 11th graders, this is something that comes up. My parents won't buy me a car. I have a driver's license. I took the driver's ed class, and they still won't buy me a car. So, maybe it's because of money. Maybe they don't trust me out on the roads by myself. So the student starts thinking, hypothesizing, what's going on? Why won't they get me a car? Is it just a money thing? Do they not trust me? Are my grades good enough, etc.? So the now what is sort of the action. So you could get a job. You could say, I'm going to drive this amount of time and I'll show you that I can actually do this and I'm a safe driver. So if you give them that non-U.S. history example, it helps them break down the sort of process of what, so what, now what, and they can sort of see that it actually goes way beyond U.S. history. But now, obviously, because the goal is to use it in U.S. history, or one of the goals at least, let's use this one. So the colonists won the American Revolution. What? So Great Britain lost a chunk of land, so all the way over to the Mississippi River and up to the Great Lakes. And basically the United States is a new country. So this is the first time that, y'all probably do this too. I accidentally say Americans or United States before the revolution is over. So, during colonial times, I'll have that slip. So now you can say the United States. It exists. So what? So now you've got to rebound from a long war and create a new government, even though, technically the Articles of Confederation was there. So you have quickly, maybe not chronologically this is perfect, but the ideas of Shays Rebellion and the whole idea of, how much government should there be. The U.S. probably needs to raise some taxes because, when Shays Rebellion happens, they can't even, fund the military to put it down. So we got to raise the taxes and figure out what is going to be this perfect balance of power between, fear of one person or group of people having too much power, but then also going too far with the Articles of Confederation where there's basically no central power at all. So what is going to be that sort of sweet spot? So as you can see, I think this idea of a turning point works pretty well. Here's another example. Different war, different time period, but I think usually the ends of wars are pretty, there's some drastic changes and decisions that have to be made. So basically, the Spanish lose their land in the West, and the United States, for the first time ever, acquires overseas territories. Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines. So what? The U.S. is now seen as a world power, and I know that's an argument that some people would say, no, that's after World War II or whatever. But I don't think you can say that they're not on the scene now. But then, as a world power, how much should the U.S. actually be involved in world affairs? And, all of these issues that you could bring in some proper nouns or some key terms with the Roosevelt corollary, imperialism. And the now what is basically saying, okay, so from here on out, or really, this is a theme in U.S. history in general, is the United States going to be neutral, or are they going to be interventionists? Are they going to be in people's business? Are they going to, try and take over other places in this sort of imperialist world or whatever? So you've got to sort of have that discussion, and you can talk about how students may favor one or the other. So this is just a way to, yet another way to break down, a big turning point. And I'm going to use one more that, probably they're able to relate to the most because they're kind of sort of living in the aftermath of it. So the what obviously is, World War II is over and much of the world is split between communism and democracy. And, don't overlook the idea that the U.S. is the only country with nuclear capabilities. So that is definitely going to factor into the so what. And even though they were somewhat allies during the war, it turns very adversarial. And it's kind of like, the top two are going to decide who's going to be the number one, what we know as the Cold War. And then basically the idea of should the U.S. contain communism and should they use military force to do that? So you can use examples if we're using proper nouns again, the Berlin split, and the airlift and so on and so forth, the splitting of Germany. You have the expansion of the Soviet Empire, and essentially the question is, is this war going to happen? And if it is, now what? So should the United States, because they're the only one with nuclear weapons and because the Soviets are attempting to get it, should they just go ahead and bomb the Soviets or whatever? So this is a question that you could, bring up, and students will actually have some surprising answers when we talk about this type of stuff. And then that whole idea that we talked about with the Spanish-American War, this common theme in U.S. history, should you be interventionist or should you be isolationist? And obviously we know that the U.S. Did sort of step up and become the world power. So many people say that after World War II, that's kind of the defining moment for U.S. and world affairs. And you can connect it to that broader theme that some people say, doves versus hawks. So doves, want to stay away from war, and hawks are ready to go. So that's something that you can use as well. But I use kind of three big turning points as far as wars go. But you can use any situation that basically illustrates a change and can get them to think about the future and what the United States should do. Just to summarize real quick, the what, basically just the facts. Break it down, what's going on. The so what does it mean? This is where that deeper thinking comes in. What conclusions can you draw? What inferences can you make? And then the now what is where they can sort of look into the future, what should be done next, and, guessing what do you think would happen next. And, it's okay to get hypothetical in these situations that can bring out some very deep conversations, but also don't forget to, with most of U.S. history, we know what the United States did. So the now what is already basically written, and you can argue, was it the right or the wrong thing, or, what actually did the United States do? Because that's not always clear because you have differing opinions. Sometimes we forget history is an argument. So this is a great way to think about certain situations in U.S. history. But as I said at the beginning, it's also very good at getting students to think about situations outside of the classroom. So what happened, this, and this, so what are conclusions I can draw, and what can I do potentially differently the next time, or what is my next plan of action. So great sort of metacognitive tool that you can use for U.S. history and also outside of the classroom. So as always, hopefully you can use this. Obviously, feel free to sort of steal the turning points. You can put anything you want in there. Just, the goal is to get the students to think deeply about a subject and sort of draw conclusions and go deeper and sort of hypothesize about the future. So as always, thanks for watching.